So the first thing everybody wants to know when they start a course is, what do I need to do for the assignments? So actually my heading here is a little bit misleading because I'm going to talk about assignments generally, but I'm going to really dig deep into assignment one. So you know how to find them, right? You can find the assignments on Canvas. Pretty straightforward thing to do. You basically just click on here and you will see the assignment brief. You can see that there are 3 assignments in this course. The first one is asking, it's a research assignment. It's asking you to write a very brief 1,000-word research report. Part of the reason for asking you to do this and to go deep on the research is so that you are able to know where to go and where to look when it comes to doing assignments 2 and 3. So assignment 2 and 3, they'll be quite similar to each other. They'll both be hypothetical situations and you are going to be giving advice. Assignment 2 is going to focus on a private merger or acquisition or takeover, change of control transaction. And you'll be providing a memorandum of advice to a participant or a regulator. I haven't written the scenario yet, so we'll see what the scenario, where it takes you. And then on the final assignment, your focus will be on a public transaction. So that might be a contested takeover, it might be a scheme of arrangement. Whatever happens, it will definitely involve parties that are listed companies and it is likely to be in the takeover regime. So research is going to be really important in relation to this. You're going to need to be able to identify things about the companies, the target and the bidder. You're going to have to know where to look for reports, and you're going to have to work with some of the shall we say, the more commercial documentation, as well as be able to find the relevant legislation to identify cases that might be relevant, guidance notes or regulator statements that might be relevant. And so given the breadth of the research, we thought it was really going to be useful for you to have an opportunity to go a bit deeper into really playing with the different research resources that you have and to be incentivized to think about the reasons why those, all the benefits, the pros and cons of each of those types of resources. So let's have a look at assignment 1. What is it asking you to do? It's an individual written report, so no teamwork involved here. You get to work by yourself. It's only 1,000 words, plus or minus. You're going to be asked to do a lot of things, so you might be a bit anxious about that. Don't be. References, images, tables, figures, footnotes, they're all excluded from the word count. And given that one of the key requirements is to provide a table that analyzes your research output, that will make it a little bit easier to fit it into the word count. This report is worth 20% of your grade, so it's half as important as the second and the third assignment tasks that are both worth 40 marks all up. It's due on week 4, at the end of week 4, on the Friday at week 4. It's due at midnight, so before 23:59. So some of you might have learnt the hard way that if you're uploading at 23:59, it might be 23:59 and 3 seconds, but it's still going to mark you as late. The way that this engine works in Canvas is you need to submit before the due time, and a couple of seconds will be late. I'm really kind and forgiving about most things, but the place that I am a super hard ass, is my French, is when it comes to submission time. If you do not have an extension or special consideration that has allowed an extension for you, then I want to see your submission before the due date, before the due time. And I'm not going to forgive it if it gets there at 2 in the morning or 2 minutes past midnight or 4 in the morning. I'm not going to say, oh, that's close enough. And the reason for that is actually because I care about you, and you need to get your sleep. You need to know when to draw a line. You will not make your assignment 11% better. And that's what you need to do. You will not make it 11% better by staying up all night. You are better off submitting and drawing a line in, getting some sleep and moving on to the next thing and learning a lesson from it, than you are submitting late and suffering a 10% penalty. And so I don't want to give you any misunderstanding at all that submitting late, that's a bit of a softie. She will help you with that, because I want you to get your sleep. So why are you doing this? I've already mentioned this. It's one of the things is I want you to have an opportunity to explore a deal that you're interested in, ideally. Who are the parties? Why did they do the deal? What's in it for each of them? Why did it work? Why did it not work? Why did it fall over? What made it newsworthy? And what were the legal issues? Um, Basically, you're going to provide a high level analysis of the deal, and you're going to use academic and professional resources to do that analysis. So your report will do two things. It will summarize the deal's key features, and you're going to evaluate the document process, you're going to document the process of your research, your methodology, and you're going to evaluate the different sources. What are the pros? What are the cons? What are these resources good for? When would you or wouldn't you use them? And you're going to present that in a table format showing me the pros and cons. I've got a slide that comes on showing you an example of what that might look like. And ultimately, this is so you can get some insight into M&A deals, Australian M&A deals in particular, and it's going to help you develop your research skills. So when you're selecting a deal, not any deal is going to do. It needs to have occurred within the last 12 months. So I don't care if it's incomplete. If it's a current deal, that's absolutely fine if it's in the news. If it closed less than 12 months ago, it's also fine. But I don't want to be reading about a deal that happened in 2017. Now, it might be that a deal that's still going now started in 2017. Fine. But basically, it needs to be an active deal right now, or it needs to have collapsed or fallen away in the last 12 months, or it needs to have closed in the last 12 months. So it can be completed, planned, or in progress. It can be an ASX listed company deal, or it could be a significant international transaction. It just needs to be newsworthy, but it must be relevant to Australia. Because otherwise, Australian law isn't relevant and you're spinning your wheels and you're not going to find what you need. So, one of the easiest ways is actually to look for deals that involve ASX listed companies, and because that is likely to mean, more than likely to mean, that the Australian rules will apply. If you're uncertain, because there are foreign companies that are listed in Australia and don't have operations in Australia, you're unsure, ask your tutor or I will help you steer you in a direction, and that direction is going to be, does the Australian law apply? If it doesn't apply, it's really not the right kind of deal to deal with. See what I did there? You're going to need to use academic and legal databases, regulatory websites, you're going to use news sites, and you can use textbooks as well. I am not expecting you to need to use any resource that isn't available online in the RMIT library. Now, in week 2, there is the whole of the lecture is devoted to working through some of these research tools and how to use them, and the tutorial will help you focus in on how to use some of these tools as well. A really important part of this criteria is to evaluate the resources that you use. Now, make sure you use 2 from each of the categories. So the assessment brief asks you to identify at least 2 resources from the academic and legal databases, from regulatory websites, so 2 regulatory websites, 2 different news sites, and 2 different textbooks. So basically, you're going to have at least 8 sources that you look at, and potentially more. It's at least 2, depending on where it takes you. Now, some of these might overlap. So, for example, Factiva, we could think about that as an academic database because of the nature of the content of it. We could also think about it as a news site. You decide depending on how you use it. And you're going to need to evaluate those resources. So you're going to think about, well, what are the pros? What are the strengths? Are they credible? Do they provide a depth of information or insight? Is it easy to find? Is it particularly relevant? Does it have excellent commentary? Like, what are the good things about that resource? But also, what are the weaknesses? What are the cons? So, are there potential biases, for example? Are they difficult to access? Are there paywalls? Is the information out of date? Is it limited in scope in some ways? When would you use it? Like, some things might be really good for understanding commercials, but not at all good for identifying the legal issues, and vice versa. So make sure that you use 2 and make sure that you think about each of them. You don't have to find the right ones because it's absolutely fine if it turns out that you pick a resource and it's useless. Tell us why it's useless. Articulate that clearly, and actually it's a bonus, right? As I said, you're going to summarize your research methodology, and this is the most important element for that part of your paper. And you're going to include it in a table. So the table won't get caught up in your word count. Given an example of what this might look like, I'm just keeping it very tight. I'm not putting any more information in there than I need. Now, it might be that in the additional words that I have, I might be explaining a little bit more about the importance of the regulatory compliance information, for example, if that is relevant, or what kind of official data is available, or how I use that official data to understand my deal better in a better way. So the research methodology section of the report needs to include your thoughts, your analysis, your insights about how each type of resource contributed to your understanding and to the overall quality of your research. So ultimately, if you pick the wrong things and you're the one who's going to make the assessment that it wasn't great research. Now, have a look at the requirements, guiding requirements. 1 or 2 of them that you've looked at and you're saying, actually, I wouldn't use these again, that's no problem. And this is why I say that you might end up with way more than 8 sources, because if too many of your sources are weak, overridingly weak, you might find that you have to keep going back and look at other sources in order to have something robust that allows you to answer the question, summarize the deal, and feel confident that the research that you've done has been useful. When you're putting your background together, so when you advise, you're telling us what the deal is, make sure that you answer these questions. And it should be really clear from the face of what you're writing about what entities are involved, what the strategic intentions are for at least one of the parties. So what are the objectives of the deal? What are they trying to achieve by making this bid or offer, or rejecting the bid or offer? And we want to have a summary of the main terms. And this is important because I want you to go beyond, well, what's the price? What can we identify? Well, what are the terms here? What promises are being made? What would the contract look like, and what will the future look like? It's also important in your report that you address the regulatory framework. So you need to identify which of the relevant regulatory, excuse the type on the slide, of the bodies, ASIC, the Takeovers Panel, ASX, ACCC, FIRB, or perhaps if your deal is in a particular industry, there might be industry bodies or industry regulators that are also relevant here. Who are the relevant regulatory bodies, and what is their role? What are they doing? Why are they interested or not interested in this particular deal? And then ultimately, this is all about legal issues, isn't it? So I want you to identify, well, what are the legal issues, or what were they? This might be a closed deal. How were they relevant? And I've repeated it twice on my slide. What were they? Which of them were dealt with in the actual terms of the deal in the contract? Which ones of them were dealt with by regulators? Which ones might have been dealt with by shareholder undertakings or directors' undertakings or supplier undertakings? Or how, how have the legal issues been addressed? Maybe they weren't addressed and maybe the deal fell over because they couldn't reach agreement. I want you to tell me the story of this deal. I want to understand what the legal issues were and what they meant. This slide has a very high level overview of what the structure of your paper should look like. This is basically repeating without suggested word counts, the information that is on the assessment brief itself. Now, look, these are the things that we're going to be looking for. It's often a good idea to follow the structure, unless, of course, you have a particularly interesting or innovative or purposeful way of explaining your research and the deal, and there is benefit in you reorganising the structure. Apologies for that. So think about that, because think about your grader, right? We've got to go through a lot of different papers at the same time. So often being able to know where to look for something makes it much easier for us as graders, but it also can make the papers very samey and not at all unique. So really, if you write well, and if you can see a better way of structuring your paper in order to present this information in a way that will highlight the strength of the work that you've done, go for it. But ultimately, use this as a checkbox at the end. Make sure that all of these things are covered in your paper and that your grader can easily see, whether that's through the use of signposting, whether it's through the use of headings, where it is that information is likely to be. And then pretty much the last thing I want to talk about here is the marking criteria. We've got 6 different criteria that we're using, so it's a little bit complex, this rubric. Go and have a look at the bottom of the assignment page and you will see the rubric for this assignment. And it's spelt out in some detail with what it is that we will be looking for from the high distinction through to a not quite pass to an abject fail. And so we'll be using that description as we're going through each of the criteria. And you'll see that the criteria effectively match what I've told you to focus on in the last 10 minutes or so. I can't see whether I'm recording or not, so I really hope I am. Of course, you might have further questions. We always do. This is brand new assignment. So where do you go for that? Before you contact me or your tutor, which you are very welcome to do, make sure that you check the FAQ resources because somebody else might have asked the question there too. Think about including your question in the FAQ, so putting it in the discussion post. Often, the act of articulating your question in a clear way helps you answer it. So, yeah, you can post. Bring your questions to your tutorials, and in the tutorials, there will be opportunities to work on part of this assignment. Otherwise, if you have questions, concerns, frustrations, or compliments, you can contact either me or your tutor in the usual ways, email, through Teams, as required. Good luck with the assignment. I think you'll have a bit of fun doing it, and we'll all know a little bit more about M&A deals by the time you're done. Cheers.